Welcome, my name is Poor Nilsson with Random Art Attack, and in this tutorial we're going to be doing two things. We're basically getting ready to bake out all the normal information onto the gun. So the first thing we need to do is basically make a high polygon mesh to bake from, and then we're also going to make an optimized low polygon mesh to bake to. As you can see that we're going to cut the seams and then basically do some UV unwrapping. If you look at that UV, it's garbage. You would never use that in a real game setting. But what we're going to basically do is show you how to set this up, and then the optimization I'm going to leave up to you. I'm trying to save as much time as I can so that this tutorial is straight to the point and it doesn't just, keep on talking about the same thing over and over again. So let's go ahead and get started here in a second. As always, feel free to subscribe, add a like, and leave comments below. That really does help these videos get noticed, and in turn, that helps us make more videos. So let's go ahead and jump back to the old file that we've just barely started with. So this is what we left off on. And so what we want to do is we want to make this a high polygon model, okay? So I'm going to tab into this, unselect everything, go to the select menu right here, and then go to sharp edges. You want about 30 degrees, that's a good one. Now you want to go to the edge, not vertices. And then you can see all of these edges are selected. We want to basically add a bevel here. And so we're going to be able to add a weight to these different edges that we can then add. So Control E, edge bevel weight, and then you type in 1 or you pull it out all the way. Now unselect it, you can see that they're still selected blue. As I add the different modifiers, I can actually keep this low poly until I need to actually change it. So let's get rid of that edge split there. We don't want that. Go to bevel modifier, and then turn off clamp like that, and then it looks really bad right now. So change the segments up to about 4, and it still looks pretty poor because it's trying to bevel everything. Underneath the limit method right there, we want to do weight. So now it's going to be using the bevel weight. And so now as I change this, you can see that it's kind of going along the sharpness of where those bevel weights were, which is really cool. So that's looking great already. Now there's some artifacts here and there's some artifacts there, but for the most part, that's almost good out of the box. Let's go ahead and add 2 subdivision surfaces like that. And you don't want to do more than 2 or so. And you look at that, and that looks great. And so we kind of want to do that across the whole model, make the whole model kind of have these non-sharp edges. And so we could go in one by one, tab in, add them at, like, do the different things, or select, but a faster way to do this is actually to select everything, hit Control J, and then tab in, make sure everything's smooth, so shading UVs, smooth, things like that. Select sharp edges, and you can see that it basically selects all these sharp edges. Now, there's going to be a little cleanup where it doesn't get all the edges that we want, obviously, but for the most part, we just add an edge bevel, so Control E, and there we go. Now, if we ever want to get rid of some bevel weights, right here is, you don't want bevels right there. You select those, hit Control E, and then -1 for the bevel weight. Now, if we want to add a bevel weight, so for example, right here, you can just kind of go in manually, and then you can add those in. So if you're not getting the exact look you want, you can kind of go in and play around with this, and we'll see that. So then let's add a modifier, bevel. You do want to make sure to change the segments up past 1. Change it to weight, change it kind of close to what you want, and then add a subdivision surface 2. That way, instead of doing it single, like to each tool, we do it all together. And then I just start to basically separate these things. So L, P to separate, L, P to separate. And then I'll just go through and then basically separate these into good tools that I actually want to be separated. Just like that. So now I have everything separated, and I'm just going to do a couple of these and then kind of skip the rest. So I'm just changing the bevel up to what I want. Now this is getting some weird artifacts. I want to Alt right click here. And so I've selected that. Let's go to the other side and do the same thing. Shift Alt right click, Control E, add a bevel weight there. And you can see that that looks beautiful. So that's good. And I don't even need a subdivision surface of 2 if I want. There's some artifacts going on right here. Honestly, you could add an edge loop in there if you want to, but I think you're never going to notice it as we start texturing it and things like that. you have to understand that this gun is taking up most of the screen. In game, the gun at the most is going to take up maybe a third of the screen, and so no one's going to ever see those things. And so you'll actually notice that in games a lot. They get a good quality, but they don't get perfection because it's not worth their time to try and make everything perfect. You'll see artifacts everywhere. So next, let's go ahead and just go to here. You can see just kind of changing the width, and it looks good right out the box. Same with this thing. And I can go through, most of these things are fixed really easily. And again, right there, there's an artifact. That's going to be like a pixel, and you're never going to even see that, so it doesn't matter. You can go in and kind of play around with it and get it perfect if you want to, but for the most part, it's fine. Now, I do want to show you this right here. Everything else is going to be kind of the same, but with this, I want to actually add some bevel right here. So I'm going to kind of select those, and select there, and then run along that. Control E, bevel 1, and that's looking better already. I also want to add it right here. So add right there. Oops, I got the other side. And then I just do Control E, and then add that bevel. You can see that there's something right there. That's weird, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. That's crazy. But you can see that that trigger's looking really good already. But you have to do it to the other side. You can either just symmetrize that if you want to, or you could go to the other side and just do it really quick, which we're going to do. So Control E, 1, and there we go. And the trigger's a lot better looking too. That's looking really cool. Two other things I want to show you right there. There's something really weird going on. One of the reasons, you go ahead and tab in, and you can see that there's like a shaded area. That means there's a face inside. So I'm just going to delete those faces. And that takes care of it, and it looks really good that way. And then kind of change that up. It's looking good. Let's look at the reference here. You can see that that's a little bit more square than what we have, so you can kind of play around with that. We're not going to get this perfect. Again, we could spend 30 minutes to make this look exactly like it, but we're just going for a basic look. Oops, I have O on, so I have to hit O. Now I don't have it selected. So tab in there, just get those edge loops. I'm just scaling here along the x-axis, and it's looking better. So not bad. And then I also want to show you this right here. So you can see that this thing is just horribly. Lots of artifacts here, lots of artifacts here, and even some artifacts up by the other bolt. So the first mistake, there's tons of triangles. Triangles do not play well with subsurface modifier, so tries to quad, and that'll take care of most of the problems right there. Now here you can still see that there's a lot of like little weird things. So you click this on, that's going to merge vertices that touch one another, and then I'm going to do snapping on. So as I move these, they'll snap and then automatically merge. Okay. And then I pull that and it gets rid of that. And so you kind of play around and just merge some of these until it actually starts looking the way you want. Right here, there's some really bad ones. So go ahead and move that there. And then you can also start to see some faces. So there is cleanup work. Don't feel bad kind of starting over sometimes. Right here, what I'm doing is I'm just moving vertices together and I'm deleting faces until I get what I want. And quite frankly speaking, it took me quite a bit of finagling until it actually looked good. So I'm trying to get some bigger triangles here as opposed to these skinny ones. And that helps a bit, but you're still seeing this weird little divot thing here. We can try and move that there. That was okay, but not what we wanted. We can try and move it there, and you can see that doesn't work at all. Again, play around with this as much as you can. And ultimately what it boils down to be is you can see that we're actually missing a bevel on one of this. And adding some bevels across this thing will make it that much better. It takes us a little bit to get there. So we just kind of play around, and we do get some better looking stuff as we play around with this. And so if you're not getting a model that looks exactly like mine, feel free to just kind of move things around and try and get rid of those. So again, here I'm trying to work with the faces, make the faces a little bit more, oops, got the wrong run there. a little bit more uniformed, and that looks better. That looks substantially better. You could add an edge loop, but I don't want to do that. So trying to do some quads, that's a good trapezoid. That's the other trapezoid would be weird, and so we didn't do that. And that's looking really good. Again, you can clean this up in a lot of different ways. We could go and clean up when we bake it a little bit, but that's hard. So the cleaner the model, the better. Now here again, we're seeing some artifacts because there's too many triangles. So we're going to try and make a big quadrilateral. Select the vertices, add the face. And there's a triangle, etc. And so that's looking a lot better. Those slight artifacts really won't show up when we bake it, so it's not anything that you have to worry about. So let's tab in again. You can play around with the weights. Ooh, that actually took care of almost everything. Go to the edges, go here. Control E, and you can see that's one of the reasons I was messing it up, and you can see that sharpens it. Control E, bevel that. And that's taking care of almost everything. You'd have to do it to the other side, or you can select everything, symmetrize it with W. We want positive to negative, and there we go. So I went ahead and cleaned up everything, and so I basically just went through and, did the same thing that we were doing. You can see that it's looking pretty good. I did find that my stuff had some duplicates underneath it, so sometimes you run into unexpected weird things like this. Also, these concave things here, if I actually turn off subsurface, it looked better, because with it on, it kind of had this weird lip to it, if you can see that. So I just turned that off there. It's probably better just to remove it right now so I don't accidentally apply it. Now, this is very low poly, but it looks high poly. If I accept these things, it will be. So I can take this and duplicate this. So Shift D, hit M, and then move it to a different layer. Now I can actually kind of remove all of these different things. And this is my low poly thing. And it will fit exactly or really close to the high poly. So now this is going to take a really long time to go through and basically remove all these. But what you have to do with these is we actually have to apply these. If I'm going to bake it in Blender, I won't have to apply them, but if I'm going to export it, I would. So let's go ahead and save this before I start to do these applications. So apply this, hide it with an H, apply it, and I'm just going to kind of, fast forward this here for a second. And so just applying all these things, and then I'm going to go and delete the other ones for the low poly one. So you can see that there is a lot of busy work trying to prep this. This is probably my least favorite part of the creative process. But after you bake it, that's my favorite. You just start to see everything come together. And so if we can get through this, I saw another duplicate as I was doing this that I forgot, so I got to delete it right there. And so I should be good to go. There we go. And now we can start to see how dense this is after we've applied it. I think it's It's 733,000 faces, which is pretty normal actually for a high poly. So I selected everything, hit Control J, enjoyed it. This is my low poly. We want as few things as possible, so we're going to do some cleanup. And so if there's any faces that are in the back that aren't seen, we're going to try and delete those. I'm not going to do everything, but I'm going to show you the basics. So this trigger, you're never going to see the back there. So I can actually select these and delete this. So this makes it so that when we actually texture this, we have more face space, basically. And so I'll use these through and try and optimize anything that you don't see, you would basically delete. There's a couple things, but like right here, let's look here, other faces. These rectangles here, I'd probably want to delete. But it kind of looks like I've already gotten rid of those, which is good. Yep. So there's no faces. That's just part of the handle. It's not part of the lip. But you might have those faces and you might want to go into those and delete these. And again, this is not on the high poly, this is on the low poly. This right here, we'd probably go through and we'd want to delete these. Here's a cool little trick. You can see how hard it is to try and get into this. So what you can do is just hit L. Okay, hit Control I to inverse the selection, H to hide, and then I can just go in there and delete this. And there we go. And so that's obscured there. It's looking pretty good. Now Control I, we could delete these. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at that to see what it looks like. But honestly, that's not really, because you can see some clipping there, and that's not what you want. For the most part, we don't need to save that many faces. For the texture, you can make that smaller if you want to. Now this is flush. If I was trying to make this game optimized, I would probably just make that one mesh, but it's okay for our intents and purposes. So we're going to lose some quality in the texture because this is going to be taking up space. But we don't really care. So again, as you delete this, you can kind of see like some artifacts there, and we don't want that. You can see into it, and that's not what you want. Of extra. So you would go, and again, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm not going to optimize this whole thing like I would if I was working for Blizzard or something like that. But I want to show you kind of what you would do for your own game. You don't want a lot of extra faces, and it's not going to kill you if you do. You do want to optimize it to try and make it look as good as you can. But if you play any game, I've played some AAA games, and you'll notice artifacts everywhere. You'll notice shortcuts taken, because ultimately, by the end of the day, you need to save time, because time is money. And so we try the best that we can. Right there, you can see that I am deleting those because that's just an obvious, you will never see that ever sort of thing. But if you're, when in doubt, just don't worry that much unless you're trying to be a production artist. Sometimes people, they kind of get this paralysis where they're so afraid to make a mistake that if they don't do it right, they just don't do it at all. And it's better to have it wrong and something done than not to have anything to show. If you're scared about the optimization a little bit, again, try and hide some of the faces. Like these things, never going to see the faces underneath this. But if you miss a face here or there, it's okay. It's just the difference between better and best. Or good and best. I don't know how the saying goes. Whatever. So underneath here, I'm going to select these with a circle select. That's just C. And then I'm going to delete that. There we go. Oh, there we go. So for our sake, this is pretty good. Now things like this are going to be fine when we bake, but right here, we don't want it to be like that. So what we do, wherever there's a hard edge, we're going to make an edge split and a seam. You need both at the same time. So go ahead and tab in. We have all of these kind of bevel weights. We don't need these. So it's going to confuse us. So just select everything, Control E, edge bevel, -1. So get rid of those. Now go to select, sharp edges. Okay, 30 degrees. And now I'm going to get rid of these ones that we don't need. And you don't need them all for the bevels, so you don't really need them here on the trigger like we did. You don't really need those because it's not a super hard edge. That angle is so soft that the smoothness will be okay. It's really these really hard edges that we need to be careful with. So for example, like right there or right there. Right here, these circles, you don't really need any hard edges on the circles. So I can kind of just see middle mouse button to unselect this. We do want hard edges there. There you go. So the rule of thumb is if it's an edge that's really quite pronounced, you want a hard edge. If it's not, don't worry about it. Like with organic things, if I was doing a character scope, I won't have any hard edges at all on the thing. Yeah, right there, it doesn't matter right there. So that's looking okay. I Control E, mark seam first. And so this is basically cutting the seams for the UV. It's not cutting the mesh, it's just cutting the UV map. So think of it like paper, and we're just cutting out paper. So that's where it would cut. Then the last thing you do is Control E, edge split. Now this is the most important thing. You can see, basically it's kind of making it flat where it's flat and smooth where it needs to be smooth. So this is good. Edge splits have to occur where, mark seams have to exist where edge splits are, but you can have more seams than edge splits, if that makes sense. So for every edge split, there has to be a corresponding seam. So now as I look, there's some weird things where we missed some edges. So go ahead, do mark seam first, and then edge split. And you can see that gets rid of the weirdness. So almost everywhere that there's weirdness, so right there, that's fine. Right here and there, you can see this, yep. So there's an edge split missing there. So select both of those. Control E. So Control E basically pulls up the edge. You can do Control V for vertices. You can do Control F for faces. So Control E since we're working with edges. So Control E, mark seam, edge split. Make sure you do mark seam first. So edge split's basically tearing the model in two at those places. Right there, there's some weird artifacts, but honestly, it's the bottom of the gun. No one cares. So this is almost ready to bake. Good high polygon model here. And we also have a good looking low polygon model here, but this does not have UVs. So tab into this. Let's drag this window and do UV image editor. Hit U, unwrap, and you can see it unwraps. Now, there's a lot of empty space, which isn't good, but yeah, we'll fix that later. So UV grid, you saw what I did there, just new UV grid. Change this to texture, tab out of there so you can see it. You can see that the texture is actually pretty uniform, which is good. If you had any weird looking like skews, those are things that you want to be aware of and you need to add more seams and unwrap it again. So like right here, you can see some weird stuff going on. So it is pretty good. Things that are hidden you can actually make smaller if you want to, but again, we're not going to optimize it that much. So think of it this way. These seams are cutting surfaces out, so you can see this is flat, and you can see that it looks almost exactly the same. Right here with the circle, so if I hit L, oops, zoomed in there, you can see that it looks like a circle. That's fine. That's a decent looking cut. Very little skewing. But the side of a cylinder should be a rectangle, so there's a ton of skewing going on here. So go ahead and add some seams here. So just click that, Control E, mark seam. You do not need an edge split because it's not an edge, but you do need a seam. So basically anywhere that there's a cylinder side, you want to add a seam. So right there, right, that one's already cut pretty good. So mark seam here. And you'd kind of go through and do this with all these circles. We'd also need some seams here. So just circle selected, that's got one, that's got one. Other side, circle select that thing. Control E, mark seam. And this one needs a seam here. This one needs a seam here. Now, as we look at this, let's start to try and find some mistakes, because there's always a seam or two that I miss. Oh, so let's check this out. If you kind of scroll like this, you can see if there's any really big skewing. So for the most part, if we left it like this, it'd be okay. It won't be great, but it'd be okay. So the next thing we need to do is we'd have to optimize space. And so we won't want any of this blank space, so it's kind of like puzzles. We would try and fit it all together. There's actually programs you can buy that does this for you, but I haven't found a good one. So this is this part right here, and you can see kind of where it's going, and it's looking pretty good. So to try and optimize this, what I would do, oh, sorry, I'm so, like, do you see how I dissolve that? I would also try and get these symmetry lines. If it doesn't affect the geometry, you don't want these extra faces, so I'll go through and just hit X, dissolve, edge loop. But we're not going to do that because it doesn't matter at this point. Okay, so what we need to do now is I would go through, sorry, this is what I was trying to get to, is I'd move everything off, and then I would unlink this here. I would move this, and then basically I'd just try and pack this into the smallest square that I could possibly do. Trying to put small things in between, put big things in the big, and it's a pain in the neck because it takes, this complex of one would take me anywhere from like 20 to 40 minutes to go through. But after I would get it, let's pretend that I got it and it fit all right here. Well, I'd put this in the middle and scale this up. If you go UV, constrain to bounds. As I scale it, you can see that it would never exit this. you would get even more space per texture. And so that's how you'd optimize it. I'm not going to do that. Okay. If you want a really good model, that's what you're supposed to do. When I make in-game models, I do that so that I have the highest quality of texture as possible. So I'm going to unwrap this thing. You do always want a margin. You can change this, see if it fills it. I do like conformal sometimes. That's actually looking better for our intents and purposes. So again, lots of ways of space that you'd have to fit. I don't like things touching because you can see seams right here. This shape should never exist. So we're going to go through and do a quick one over to make sure that there's nothing. So I select it, and then if you hit like L or dot, it'll zoom in. So right there, you can see right there at the inside, there's no seam. So I'm just going to mark a seam there. Okay, unwrap it, and it takes care of it. So U is unwrap. Yeah. So that's looking good there. So keep on looking through. Right here, I see some more problems here. Never want to see something like that. So turning on conformal, hit period and it'll go straight there. Okay, we can see that we need to basically put a seam there. And I didn't unwrap it yet, but it'll fix it. That is right here. It looks like there's no seam there. That's strange. Doesn't feel like it needs one, so maybe I need an edge loop there too. Good. All of those are looking good. So I go through and make sure there's no weird looking shapes. Ooh, this one's hideous. So changing the different type of unwrapping might give you some things that you want to, like strange unwrappings that you wouldn't have otherwise. With A, so I'm just going to box select this thing. So I'm going to cut it some more. So just hit L to select, Control I, and then hide with H. So I'm looking at this. Let's try and figure out what's making the problem. That looks fine right there. Right there. So we don't have cuts there, and we need cuts there. So just put some cuts there. Put some cuts there. Okay. Unwrap this thing, and that looks a lot better. So unhide everything, unwrap everything again, and I'm looking for anything, and there was nothing wrong. Make sure you go through, make sure that everything's good. So we're going to now try to bake this in Blender. Don't bake things in Blender if you can get around it. There's free things online that are awesome. Handplane 3D is awesome for. We're going to basically in the next tutorial texture this with Substance Painter. Baking this in Substance Painter is way better than Blender. So the process is this. You take the high polygon and you select the low polygon. So then in the render, there is a bake method. You go to normals. You want to do tangent, yes. Select it to active. You want that. This, you can play around with it a little bit, but you're going to get in more trouble than not. I do like changing the margin up so that the seams aren't as clear. And so this thing needs to be one. So I'm going to say this. It needs to be one thing. So I'm going to basically join all of this. That's going to take a while because it's a big file. So I'm going to hit Control J. And it doesn't join it because it's too big. So I have to do parts. So just do 2 parts, Control J, and now everything will join. It's really weird. This is already one thing. So we're good there. Or it should be. Okay. So high poly 1 is cube. The other's 0.4. Both of the layers are visible at the same time. Select cube first, then shift, then hit bake. And you can see that it's basically baking. You can cancel it at any time. What actually happens is Blender is so bad at baking, it doesn't bake within this thing. And we could sit here for minutes and minutes. It's not worth your time. So you can bake it if you want to, but we're going to be baking this in Substance Painter next tutorial. Or just go and download Handplane because it's a really good program too. So thanks for watching this. I hope this helped. Thank you for the patience in waiting for these videos. I should be able to make these videos more frequently because I've just gotten a little bit more free time. And so as always, subscribe, leave a comment, thumbs up, all that good stuff. Check us out on Patreon. There's some goodies that we give you guys if you're a subscriber, and follow us on Twitter as well. Thanks.